Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our webinar today. We have an amazing turnout and a ton of great tips from our presenter today. My name is Jeff Model, and I'm the founder of CG Architect, and I'll be moderating today's session. So before we begin, I just want to introduce our speaker and then go over a little bit of the format of the webinar. So originally from Belgium, Pieter is an architect and engineer by trade and is the Director of Design Technology at A+I. They adopted Enscape in 2016 and have actually been creating visualizations since 2004. And those of you that hang out on the forums may also know that last spring they released a custom tool to create custom Enscape assets. So the webinar today is aimed at architects, designers, and BIM managers with an intermediate to advanced level knowledge of Enscape and Revit. So there'll be a lot of really great tips coming up. If you notice in the webinar interface, there is a question section, so feel free to use that at any time during the webinar. We'll be answering as many of the questions during Peter's talk as we can, but we'll also reserve a 15-minute section at the end as well for questions. If we don't get to your question though, not to worry, we will be answering those by email after the webinar. So with that, I'm gonna hand things over to you, Peter. Just give me one sec to, hey Gemma, do you wanna switch Peter over?
Sure. Let me just do that now, make presenter. There we go, Peter.
Thank you. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can.
All right, great. So I'll go through the subjects that we'll touch on today, and then we can dive in right into Revit. So we'll starting out with creating custom assets, looking at new ways that the new landscape that's coming out really soon is going to allow us to do that much more easily. We'll be looking after that at how you can tweak your family settings to make it a lot easier to place them and to manage them. We'll be looking at 5 ways to clean up the placeholder geometry of your assets in Revit. We'll be looking at how you can nest assets together or nest them in other families. And then to finish off the assets, we'll be looking at some more advanced techniques with Revit and assets. After that, we'll be looking at some material tips specific to Revit. We'll be looking at a trick that we use for the visual lighting at our office. And time permitting, we can talk a little bit about active view versus camera view and what the differences are, and how to use them well. All right, so let's jump right into Revit. So let's start off with custom assets. So traditionally, one of the biggest constraints with, just kill my webcam here so that we can see the full screen. All right. So traditionally, I would say that one of the biggest constraints with creating good looking visualizations in Revit has been that it's really hard to find good entourage. And if you think of a good rendering and in your head, you just remove all the entourage, all the people, all the plants, all the furniture, all that type of content, there's really not much left to really make it come to life. And so for the last few years, we've had the standard Enscape library that ships with Enscape, which has, I believe, almost 2,000 assets now, which has been a huge help. But of course, a lot of people do want to still put their own content in there. So there has been a workaround that we helped develop to do that for the last year. But the new version of Enscape 2.9 that I believe is going to come out somewhere in November is going to have official full support for this. And it makes it a lot easier to create your own custom content. So let's start with how can we add a custom asset to our project. So if you go to Asset Library, the newest version of Enscape, and you can download this beta on their website, so you can try it yourself. Then you will see the panel that you're used to, but now there's another tab, Custom Assets. If you go there, this is where you will see your custom library. And so I've got a bunch of stuff loaded in here already. But if you're starting out from scratch, you'll just have a plus, and that plus allows you to add new assets. So let's click on that. And then it's going to switch to a different editor that will allow you to generate content. So let's take a look. Let's create a chair that I found in SketchUp. Well, let's put it through this converter and then see how it looks in Revit. So let's switch to SketchUp. So this is what you would probably find on the SketchUp Warehouse somewhere. While we're on the topic of SketchUp Warehouse, this question comes up a lot. What's the best place to find content to create or to turn into assets? I have a preference for the SketchUp Warehouse. For one, it's free. That helps. But most importantly, the assets that you find there are generally, on average, I would say lower poly count than what you would find on a website like 3D Sky or TurboSquid or many of these other platforms. So SketchUp Warehouse will often have like hopefully below 20,000 polygons is what you want to aim at, but definitely not millions. And it's definitely, it happens often when you download a model from 3D Sky that it's in the millions of polygons, and that puts you so far from where you want to be that now just a lot of work cleaning it up. Also with SketchUp Warehouse, another benefit is that the materials that you'll find in there are very simple. Whereas if you go to 3D Sky and download a model there, it might be very complex materials that might not translate well to an OBJ or an FBX export, which is what we will need for the Enscape importer. For all those reasons, I like SketchUp Warehouse. It also helps that it has a large library targeted, among other things, to architects and designers. So there's a ton of stuff out there. So we found this chair, a fairly simple model. And what we want to do when we want to turn this into an asset is just we want to make sure that, one, it is positioned correctly relative to the origin. So we want the origin, in this case, in the middle of the chair. And we don't want it to be far away from the origin because this origin is going to translate into your family origin eventually in Revit. And you cannot change that. So you need to, if you want to do changes to that, you need to do it here. Second, you want to make sure that front, like the chair is actually, or your piece is actually facing the front, and it's not like 90 degrees rotated. So one way to do that in SketchUp is just click on a little house. I see that's the front side. I see the front of the chair, so we're good. So let's export this chair as a 3D model. We've got a bunch of options here. We could do OBJ or we could do FBX. I typically go with OBJ because I find SketchUp at least. You will notice that it gets a lot slower to import and export OBJs when you have large models, let's say over 40,000 polygons. That is on probably larger than what you want to use to create an asset anyway. So if your OBJ is taking a really long time to export, maybe take that as a cue that the model might be a little bit too heavy. So I'm just gonna show you the options here that I use. Definitely export texture maps. That is something that we definitely want to have on. And then swap YZ coordinates. That just means that in SketchUp and in most architectural software, Z usually is up. So Z is a blue axis. So here in SketchUp, we can see that that's up. In most traditional visualization software, and in this case, Enscape, the asset editor, Y is actually up. So here on export, we can already fix this. If we forget this part, we can also fix it in the editor. And then units, the Enscape editor is expecting meters. You can help yourself by setting it here. If you forget, you can scale it in the Enscape editor as well. But I just find this more simple. And then export two-sided faces. This is a tricky one. So in SketchUp, you might find that in some models, faces are painted on both sides. This is not something that you will traditionally see in most visualization applications. So that OBJ can't actually do that. So when you do export two-sided faces, what it's actually going to do is it's going to export each face twice, one for the front and one for the back. So that in fact doubles your polygon. So you want to use this only when you need to. So what I do is I export without two-sided faces. Most of the time, if I have a proper model, it should be fine. If you see that a lot of materials are missing, you could consider turning this on and trying it again. So there we go. And it's going to give me a report at the end. So 14,000 faces, which is under, like, what we have is a 20,000 polygon max that we try to aim for. So we're well below that, and we've got the two materials are exported as well, which is great. So then let's switch back to the editor. Maybe I should start here before we import the geometry. If you start this for the first time, you will probably get this dialog, which asks you to appoint two folders where it's going to store the data while you work on these assets. So the first folder is the asset projects. So the Enscape asset editor is actually, when you work, it's going to always create two things. One is going to create an asset project that saves all the information needed if you later want to come back to that asset and make edits to it. Maybe you want to tweak the materials, maybe you want to change the name, change the scale, that kind of stuff. And then it will also, when you're done, generate the actual asset that's then loaded into Revit. So you need two folders. So here, I just have that set up to my C drive. So let's get started. So by default, it starts in a new project. Let's import the geometry. Got that model that I just exported. And then it comes in. You can see I'm facing the front, so it's not upside down or something. That's because we had the Y set up correctly. It takes the name of the file that you import, but obviously you can change that if you want. And then let's take a look. Let's change here. Yeah, one of the amazing things with this editor is that you obviously have an Enscape running here in real time. So it's so much easier to change materials than with the previous workaround. So maybe we want to give this a little bit more of a textured look. We could come in here with our fabric material, say use albedo for the bump map, and then I could slide that over if I want to, but I kind of look like how this looks, so let's keep it like that. And then here, the steel, OBJ can really export whether a material is metal or not. So we will have to tell Enscape, hey, this is actually metal material. So let that put it on 100% metal, and then maybe like a 50% roughness so that we get comes a little bit shiny. There we go. And so you have the full material editor here that you are, if you have worked in SketchUp or Rhino or on some of the other platforms, you might be already familiar with this. It's fairly self-explanatory, and of course the amazing thing is that you can just play with it here and you immediately get visual feedback of how it's going to render. And then if you use texture maps, they'll be listed here at the top. So I could reload a steel map here if I wanted to, or maybe change the size or something like that. A little tip, if you right click here, you can actually export these materials or import them back. So if it's materials that you find yourself using over and over again, I would recommend making a small library, maybe with your with your rubber and your metals and basic fabrics to start from. All right, so these are the materials. Then let's look up here, the scaling. So this is going to give you an indication whether you actually brought it in the right scale. Right now, there's no visual indicator here to tell you what size of an object you're looking at here. So I'm going to keep an eye out here. You can use this to scale the object up or down. Something that I've noticed is if your model is very off scale, and it might be like very tiny, it might become so small that you have trouble finding it. So a little tip here is when you're numerical pad, you can use your 2, 5, 4, 8, 6 buttons to get the different views. So 2 would be front, and it doesn't zoom to fit when you do that. So it brings it back. So 4, 6, 8 would be the different sides, and then 5 would be the top. So let's position this back like this. And then the up axis. So if it came on its side, maybe like this, for example, you forgot to put the Y up, you can do that here and correct it. So placeholder geometry, this is geometry that you will see when you load it into any of the applications. So when you load it into SketchUp or Revit, that's that placeholder triangulated geometry that you see. If you don't load anything up here, what you will be seeing is a box, size to this size. So there's a lot of ways to make this. I'm just going to show one real quick on how I do it. And maybe let us know in the questions or in the chat whether you want to have more follow-up on that, what the different techniques are. So what I'm going to do is switch to Blender, free and open source programs that you can all download for free. I used the 2.91 version, and I'm going to bring in that OBJ that we've just exported from SketchUp. Right, and so I want to do a few things here real quick. So first, what I typically do is I remove all the materials, because on our placeholder, we won't be seeing materials at all. Then I right click and do shape flat, because we don't have a smooth placeholder. It's actually triangulated and not smoothed over. And I go here to the top to turn my wireframe on so you can see what I'm doing. And then I go to my modifier tab here, and I add a decimate modifier. And what that's going to do is it's going to try to figure out where it can combine polygons and still try to preserve the shape as much as possible. So decimate, and this is think of this as a percentage. 1 is 100, 0 is 0 polygons. So I think this came out something at 0.03. So I try to aim for a face count of 500, no more than that. So I have a little bit of lead, not much. All right, this is good enough. And so what I do then is I apply the modifier just to be sure that it's included in the export. Not all exporters apply modifiers when you export. So let's apply that here, and then File, Export, OBJ. I'll show you my what settings I typically use. I exclude typically materials because there's no need to have them. And that is pretty much all you will need. So let's call it a 100 placeholder and load it up into Enscape. And you can click here to actually see it. So by default, it won't show you. And so they're both the same orientation, same size, so we're good. If you load this in, by the way, it might look really weird, like there might be dark splodges on it. You don't really have to worry about that because that doesn't really translate to any of the like Revit or SketchUp. That weirdness is left behind in this editor. All right, and I believe the last thing we need to do is create a thumbnail. And so you can just position your camera as you want here, and then take a screenshot, and then it's going to render it for you. And that's all you need to do. And you will notice 2 extra buttons here. So real quick, one is to just bring you back to that camera position so that you can match the thumbnails. Like once you found the right position, that you don't have to try to put it back in the same spot every time. And then this will actually bring the preview out to your image editor, maybe if you want to do. I haven't really found a lot of use for this, but I'm sure there is. And then we are going to save the project. So this, again, remember, Enscape asset projects allow you to edit the assets afterwards. So I'm just going to go with the default name. I recommend you do the same. And then once that's done, I'm going to generate the asset. It says asset generated. Let's exit out of the editor. Let's go back to the Enscape library, custom assets, and right here. And so notice there's an edit pencil. So I would be able to just edit it, pick off where I left, maybe update the geometry, update the materials. Is probably something that's going to happen quite often. So let's place it. There we go. So we've got our placeholder. Let me just hide this for a sec. Placeholder geometry in, and then let's see how this renders in Enscape. Oh, there we go. There we go. And so I hope you'll agree, it's actually, compared to the previous method, this is a lot easier to get stuff in. So these are 2 other things I did as a test. So this one is an interesting one because I actually spent quite some time trying to do this with the old method, because there's so many materials and so many different types of materials in this thing. It took ages. And so I just took this as is and run it through the exporter or the asset creator without doing any tweaks. And this is how it came out. So I'm really happy with how like the material mapping turns out well. It translates the materials well. But this is another one that I put in. So one thing that with the previous method was really hard is getting assets like this, where you have leaves that actually have cutout maps on them. To do that in the old method, you had to manually go into the GLTF and change the code there. So that was really tough. And so with this new method, all you need to do is tell the Enscape editor that it needs to use a transparency on the PNG maps, and you're good to go. It's really self-explanatory. Let's hide this for a second. So two more things that I want to touch on with the custom asset creation process. So you've noticed that there's these two folders, right? One for your project assets, or asset projects, I should say, and then one for the actual assets themselves. So the locations for both are saved in this file right here. So if you're working in a large firm that has some kind of deployment, software deployment or file deployment, you can actually use this to deploy this to all your users. So this, I think, especially relevant for BIM managers or IT managers. You don't have to go to every machine to just make sure that they're on the right, that they have the right library linked in. You can deploy that on the network. And then you do want to think a little bit about the asset projects folder and who is going to have access to that, because everyone who has access to an asset project can edit that asset. And so that means that, let's say you have two teams each working on a project, but they use the same asset from the library. And both teams could now start to change it, and I would be a surprise to the other team. What we're thinking right now of doing is deploying everyone to the same asset folder, but deploying everyone to a local, like in their My Documents, asset projects folder that will be empty by default. And if users want to edit an asset, we can send them the custom asset project, they put it in that folder, and now they can edit it. You do have to then worry about how to get that edited asset project back to you. That's still a little bit of an issue. I'm sure it's going to be ironed out over time, maybe with some more permissions. There's also a new, really interesting feature here that a lot of people have been asking for. If you switch back to the asset library, you might have noticed mine loads really quickly. There's now a new option to put your assets offline. So that will download it one time to a location of your choosing, and then going forward, it will reference that location. And you can see I can scroll without getting the loading thing. I can switch really quickly between them. The search works really quickly. And so I really recommend doing that. And again, if you're like on if you have a shared server, you can put that on the shared server location so that you don't all individually have to download it, but you just have to download it once, and everyone paths to that one location. And so again, if you have a deployment strategy in your office, this is the path to that file, so that you can ask your IT people to deploy that file with the right settings in it. Also, I forgot to mention, we will, after this webinar is over, we will share this file and all the files that I've used to create a chair, and all the files that we'll use going forward, so that you can, if you want to, you can recreate this on your own, and you can also reference these things at your convenience. So let's take a look at how, like just 1 minute on how assets actually work in the context of Revit. So when I go in here and I place an asset, what actually happens? Now let me place one that I haven't placed yet. So you see, it takes a while to spin up, right? So why is that? Because it's actually making multiple families on the go. So it doesn't really download or a Revit family from somewhere that happens to have this placeholder in it. is creating all that stuff on the fly. So let's place it. So I'm sure most of you have noticed that all the assets come in the planting category. And so when you open, it's a regular family, you can host it to a level, it has spacing, all of that stuff, type parameters, just like any other planting family. If you look inside the planting family, you'll find another planting family. And then if you go in here, you'll find the imported geometry as a direct shape. So that's a Revit import. And so why are these the 3 levels? Why not just 1 level? Well, so this is required. This is what Revit makes you do if you want the ability to scale assets, or scale families, I should say. And so because Enscape wanted us to give the ability to scale assets, it's very helpful for things like trees and bushes and stuff like that. They had to go with the planting category. I will come back to that later. Then how does it know that this thing should actually be replaced with an asset when it renders? How does Enscape know that? Well, if we take a look in the type settings of this, type parameters of this family, we'll notice there's 3 parameters here: asset ID, asset source, and native asset height. So asset ID is just a unique number that is automatically generated whenever you create an asset. And in Revit, Enscape will scan every family that it's sent to by Revit and see, is there an Enscape asset ID parameter? Yes. Is it not empty? Okay, then it's going to try to find it in the library. If it can't, it will throw you an error. You can still load the project. It will just tell you, I couldn't find X number of assets. If it's empty, it will ignore this parameter. Then the asset source, that helps Enscape tell where it needs to look first. Is it remote? That means the server. Is it local? That means on your, like, the custom assets that are stored on some like shared drive maybe that you have. And then native asset height, that is needed internally to make it work. We should never change this. And then of course you have the height parameter. That's not Enscape specifically, that's just Revit. That always comes with planning families, and this allows you to scale, right? If I would type in 5, I would have got a 5 feet tall chair. So that's how it works. So let's do some stuff with that now that we know that. So for one, a complaint that comes up a lot is, I don't want my furniture to be planted. And that's totally legit. And so it's a very simple solution for that. If you're okay with losing the ability to scale the assets up and down, what you can just do is go into the family, go to the family settings, or the family settings, I guess, and then change the category to furniture. And that's all you really need to do to change the category. I have a default different material for furniture than planting. So this is why you saw the material change. And now we have a furniture piece. So it will still render fine. Actually, I think I still have Enscape running. Yes, so I copied it twice, and you see change the category, still renders fine. But now it's furniture, so you can schedule it as furniture, you can tag it, we'll have the line weights of furniture, all that good Revit stuff. Let's look at another thing, how we can modify family settings on assets to make our lives easier. So this comes up a lot, right? You have these assets that really don't belong on the floor. You want to put them on a desk, on a shelf, something like that. And it's kind of tedious, right? So if you try to do it, it looks like it's on there, but if you click, it actually falls to the floor behind it. So that's not really working well. Of course, you could measure it, and you could type in here the height. You could do that, but there's an easier way. So if you go select the asset, edit the family, and then what you want to do is turn work plane based on and always vertical off, and then load it back into your project. And then when you try to place it now, it is going to find faces to put it on. And remember, you can hit space to rotate things or flip things around its origin. So we do this on tons of assets once they're loaded into the project. Another family setting that comes up with vegetation a lot, go into the family, you leave work plane based unchecked, but you uncheck vertical. And so what that is going to do if I place this, it's going to follow the topography. So it is going to be perpendicular to the topography, if you will. If instead, if I edit this family and change that back to always vertical, it will always point straight up. And so depending on the type of plants you have, usually one is obviously wrong. Like with trees, and it will be most obvious when you render it. Like trees, you don't expect them to point out like 45 degrees. They generally grow upwards. But these small plants, this is a little bit weird, right? You would expect them more to follow the topography a little bit more. So this is a way where you can influence that. And you can do that after the fact. You don't have to go replacing them. So we did a bunch of edits to these families now. So you might be curious, like what happens if, you know, like that chair that I had here that I changed to furniture, what will happen if I place that straight from the library instead of copying it in my project or dragging it from the project browser? So what if I, which one was that? This guy. So you can see it's still furniture. So somehow it remembers these settings. And so the way it works is when you place an asset from the library, Enscape first checks, is there already an asset with this name in the project? If so, use it. And so you'll get whatever you change to it with it. If there's not a family with that name, let's create it from scratch. And so you want to be mindful when you're changing names of assets, like it's called Armchair 04. If I would change this to something, and I would place the asset again, you can see it's now calculating again, right? It takes a little longer. So it's building those planting and the nested planting family again. And so now I get a new family. So this is something I think especially relevant for BIM managers is if you want to set this up, you'll have to play with if you want to pre-set up certain assets to work in a certain way and load those into your template, you will not be able to change the names. Let's jump to the next topic. So this comes up all the time is we made like this chair, right? And it looks kind of awful in plan, right? This is not really what you want to be showing in drawing. So do I then have to place two chairs? Is that what, and then hide one and maybe put one in a hidden work set or something like that? So there's actually ways to deal with this. And I'll go from like most obvious to maybe more and more in the workaround territory. So the most obvious thing here is, as many of you probably realize, is if you go to the inside the family, we can, in the floor plan, we can actually replace it with a masking region and a bunch of lines. So to speed things up, I drew this beforehand. And so let's copy this. This is just, all this is one masking region and then a bunch of lines on top. And so maybe while we're here, we might as well change this to a furniture piece. And then let's paste that placeholder, that masking region with the lines in here. And then next up is telling Revit not to show this in plan. So let's select the nested family. We get the visibility graphics dialog here, and then we turn it off on plan. And then when we load this in, if everything works well, it should be cleaned up. It's a very obvious, straightforward way to deal with these things. The obvious limitation here is this hasn't solved anything in 3D or anything in elevations or sections or something. But still fairly efficient way to deal with it. So let's look at a few ways to see what we can do with elevations and sections and 3Ds. So unfortunately, we cannot hide the edges. And I really, really wish we could. But in the meantime, here's what we can do. So for one, these guys will get the same, or your assets will just inherit their material from the object styles dialog. So if you go to manage object styles and find, these guys are in the planting category, so you can find planting, there's no material assigned here. And so what that means is then Revit is going to pull its default material, which unfortunately is dark gray. So let me just change the default here to default, which is our template's default material, which is a white material, and click OK here, and you see that all the assets that are on the planting category are now white. Still not great though. So let's see what else we can do. So if there's a handful of assets, what you can do is select them. Let's say you want one 3D view where you want to show these people for scale, but you don't want to have them look like this because it's distracting. So you can right click on them, override graphics and view by element. And then what we want to do here is change the same, pick the same color for the lines as for the solid pattern that we're going to assign. So let's do a color like a 60, 60, 60 is something that I like. And then here we do solid fill also for 60, 60, 60. So we're going to have the edges solid 60, 60, 60, and also a solid pattern with that same color on it. And so if we do that, we get something that looks more, it's freezing for a second because Enscape considers this an update. There we go. So now this is more going to look like a cutout person or maybe like a conceptual person. So you might say like override and view, are you going to do that on hundreds of assets? Like BIM managers, I don't like that. And so what we can do instead is build in filters in the view. So what I've made is in this particular 3D view, I've got 4 filters that are looking at the comments fields of my assets and then using a certain color to override them. So for example, if I select all these guys and type in black, they will get that effect. If I select these 2 and type in white, they will look more white. So this will help, like if you have a dark background, it doesn't really help to put dark people in front. So it's the colors that I use for this is really contextual. And I don't have a tree here, but for trees, we use green. And then you get more of this style. Not perfect, but sometimes it gets the job done. So let's look at the third method of dealing with this triangulated geometry. So for simple objects like these, this is a standard asset, this is a custom asset. If you look at it, they're really simple. So what you can do is go inside the family and just model over it and then delete the nested family. And to save some time, I've already done that, but I turned the visibility off. So this is my imported object. So let's delete that. And I just modeled over it, 2 extrusions and a bunch of lines on top so that it looks like a bad implant. That's really the intent here. And so all I need to do is turn the visibility back on. And so when I load this in our file, the placeholder geometry triangulated stuff is gone. I have a nice clean object in Revit that works in all views, elevations, sections, 3D, and it works well in plan. Let's see. So the reason why I prefer this method sometimes is that here you can make sure that the Enscape asset and whatever it's replacing are at the same exact position and the exact same size, which if you use some of the other methods is not always a guarantee. For example, there is a method in Enscape where like you have a certain object, like this comes with our template, but you might want to replace that everywhere with a different object. So in that case, I'm sure many of you are already aware, but for those of you who aren't, you go to an asset, you say here little dots, and then you say link Revit family to asset. It gives you a list, and then you can say, choose like chairs, lounge chairs, and then you pick the type that you want to replace it with, and then that's all you need to do. And so what Enscape is going to do then at that point is go inside that family, add those 3 parameters, at the right ID, at the right size, and you're ready to go. I think this works well it works very well when you have already an object that is, let's say you download a Revit family from a manufacturer or a chair or whatever, and it is the right size, but it just looks awful when you render it. And you also have this better version of it, the SketchUp model. So this is a great way where you can have that the Revit family and all its information in there, but still have Enscape swap it out with something nicer. You will have to coordinate origin of the asset and origin of the family. Because what you don't want is that in Revit it renders here, but in Enscape when you launch it, all of a sudden it's here because the origins are not matching. And then here there's a workaround. This is probably the most complicated workaround where you can hide edges on the imports. So if I switch to this design option, you will see how it looks after I've used this workaround. So I'm just going to really quickly try to do it on the custom asset that we made there at the very beginning that shares. So let's put it here. So here are my steps. I go inside the family and then I export an FBX. All right, and then I switch to Max, which many of you might have access to through your Autodesk descriptions. It comes in the AAC industry collection. And what I want to do is I want to import that FBX right in here. Center settings are fine. Delete the camera. Don't need that. Then we want to add a layer here. That is going to allow us to create to control the material that this thing gets when it's loaded in Revit. So Enscape asset. ME100 there. All right, and so now what I want to do is set the color by layer. So just select it, click on the little color here, click here, and it turns into by layer. And then you want to go to the modifier tab, open this up, select edge, Control A to select all edges, go down and hit invisible. That's all there is to it. And then file, export, and you want to export to a very specific file format. You want to do DXF, but DXF 2007, none of the other versions will work. And then select objects, all right. And so back in Revit, we can import there it is. So delete the old one, leave the new one in place, and load it in your project. And the edges are hidden. And this actually works relatively well in Plan as well. So I often find myself pulled towards this method because it solves it in all views and not the masking region. Because when you count it up and after you're really done tracing the outline and putting the masking region on there, like by that time, if you know the steps well in Max, you can get there pretty quickly. I can even control the material now on a per asset basis. So go to manage object styles, imports, and then imports and families, and you will find the material here, or the category here. You can change it here. So material, the line color, line pattern. All right, asset nesting. This comes up a lot is I want to put one asset in a regular family, but when I load it in, it doesn't show up anymore. And that's it makes sense when you think about it, because Enscape is looking for these IDs, right? And so when let's say this is my main family, it's going to look, okay, is there an ID here? No, okay, then just render the geometry. So what you need to do is find a way that you can put this little asset, which is a little plant, on this desk inside the family that it still recognizes ID. And so those of you who are familiar with Revit will know that you need a shared family. So let's open the family. Just kind of close a few tabs real quick. And then, so I've opened the family. Now let's open this little asset that I just loaded from the standard library, added the family. And what I want to do here, before I load it into the desk family, is I want to check shared. And then load it. And while we're here, we might as well turn workplane based on so that we can put it on that desk more easily. So right here. And so when we load this whole, also notice the main family doesn't need to be shared, right? It's just the nested families that need to be shared. So when we load this into the Enscape webinar main file, it's going to pop up here, but you will be able to tab select. And that is a sign that a family is shared nested. And so in Revit land, that means like I still want to consider this its own little objects with its own little parameters, with all like it exists in its own right. It will schedule, it will tag separately, all that stuff. It's just that it's nested in this family, so it moves wherever that family goes. And if I hide the main family, the nest family hides, stuff like that. So remember, if you're inside a family, you can also go to the library directly. So I could go in the library and find stuff here, but when I load it in, it's not going to be automatically shared. You still need to edit the nested family, check that little box, share it, load it back into the main family, and then load it back into the main project. And so another way, this is how you can also combine two Enscape assets. So this is a car and a person that I've combined. And Enscape is still running, so there we go. So these are combined. So when I move this, car over, like they both move. And I also put a parameter on them on the nested family so that you can turn them off. So that removes the driver. And so that's a way if you have assets that you find yourself combining all over the place instead of grouping them, this is a more efficient way in terms of performance to do it. Let's see. Okay, so and now let's finish off with some Enscape asset tricks that are more advanced. So typically with Enscape assets, if you wanted to have a different scale, you need to make a new type. Let's say you want 100 of these with all slightly different sizes. That means 100 types. That's kind of annoying. So there is a trick to make instance-based scaling that works in both Revit and Enscape. So I've included this in the sample file that you'll get in the email afterwards. So just go to this family, edit family, and check out the parameters set up here. So you'll need both this formula, this parameter, and then lock the height with a formula. And then it will just work. This workaround unfortunately does not combine with the hidden edges. For some reason, it doesn't work. Then you can drive the Enscape asset IDs with formulas. So for example, I have a couch here that by default is just going to be rendered by Revit geometry. But we built in a formula so that if you go to the type settings and say render as Enscape asset and click OK, it's going to be replaced with the Enscape asset. And so you could start building this kind of stuff into your template if you have stuff that you find yourself using over and over again. Another trick is modifying Enscape standard assets materials. This is a little bit tricky, but what you can do, especially if you make your library local, then all the little checkbox that we saw in the beginning, right here, this means that the Enscape assets are on your server right now, and so you can go find that and manually change the GLTF to do things like this. So these two are copies of the official Enscape person, but what we did is just change the material to black and to white to make them more conceptual. So you'll see like the black one almost looks like a cutout, and then but they're much easier to place than a cutout because they're actually 3D. And then this one is a white version. Again, the black one doesn't always work well if the project has a lot of dark tones. We don't really have time to go into how to do this, but if you want to do this, you can post a thread on the Revit forum on Enscape. And then you can tag me at Peter, and then I'll reply there how to do it. And then I don't have an example for this, but we've been using Dynamo to scatter vegetation. So in Enscape, you have for 3ds Max, you might be used to programs like Scatter or FirstSpec that can like place and randomize a whole bunch of vegetation for you at once, so that you have like a natural looking forest without spending like an hour placing trees. You can simulate the exact same thing with Dynamo graphs. And then again, you can tag me on the forum. I'm happy to share the Dynamo graphs. I'm seeing we're running a little bit low on time. Let's jump into higher gear. A short section on materials. I think the most useful tip I can give you is, well, let's do this on the actual materials dialog. When you're tweaking your materials specifically for Enscape, so you'll be on the appearance tab, there's a big difference between hitting OK and hitting apply. So let's just do a change here. Apply means just send, in the Revit context, it means just send that to Enscape directly. So it skips the whole model update in Revit and just Enscape update. So it's almost instantaneous. So if you were to like trying to find the exact right bump value, the exact right color, just change it, apply, change it, apply. When you're done, hit OK. And then what's going to happen then is the Revit model is actually going to update, and then Revit is going to send the new data to Enscape, and Enscape is going to have to do a full refresh, so much slower. So it's a big productivity boost here. Let's look at these 4 grasses. Many of you might already be familiar with this, but for those of you who are not, if you name a material with a certain keyword, in this case, short grass, grass, and so on, Enscape will replace it with a scattered grass blades, if you will. So they need to be in order. So grass short is not going to work, but they don't have to be capitalized. You can make small letters or whatever. So short grass is short. Then grass is like regular height, I guess. Then tall grass and wide grass are different variations again of the same. And so this is the color of the grass is just sampled from the color map that you put in that material. So if I go to my materials, search for grass, I see I have here a texture map I got from Dan Stein, which is just a varying greens. And you just stretch that out really large so that the tiling isn't obvious. And then you get like slight randomizations in your grass so that if you look at it from afar, it doesn't look like the same color as far as the eye can see. And so Dan actually has a really good 2 articles. You can find them in the example file, and we can paste them in the chat. So 2 articles that go into great detail on like all the little tricks with grass and Revit, and he also has one on glass, which I really recommend. So almost everyone, I'm presuming, has glass in their projects, and he has like the best tips to make it stand out really well in Revit and Enscape. So really quickly, there's now 2 new keywords, short carpet and long carpet. People used to use the grass to do this, but now the grass moves a little bit in the wind, and you don't want to really have that with carpets, so they made specific keywords for that. Water is very easy to do in Revit, but it's not a keyword. So let me show you how you make water. You go to materials. Let's create a material from scratch, right? Let's call it water 2. And then you need to swap out the right material shader here. So you go to appearance. They made it really hard to find, and this is on Revit. So you right click on it, you replace. Then you go to the appearance library, you open that up, you go to liquid, and now you have to select the right one here. You cannot select any of the transparent or generic ones. It needs to say water in the type column. So let's do like indoor pool, and then you can just double click it or click that little icon, does the same thing. You can close it, and you see that the appearance tab has now changed to what they call the water shader. And so you have different presets here, and some of them you can actually change the color, I believe. Yeah, you can do like custom color. Enscape will actually follow this stuff pretty closely. So that's how you do water. Then let's take a look at normal maps. So normal maps are a great way to add detail to materials that might otherwise look a little bit flat. So in our practice, we do a lot of hospitality stuff. It is tough to fabrics, tough to materials, really hard to model, very time consuming, but very easy to do with a normal map if you have one. And so there's two ways to do it. Forgot what material name this is using, letter. All right, so this is using what is called the new realistic shader. So you can actually, you can find that in the library. And maybe tag me in the forum if you have trouble finding it. And then you just load it in here. And then click OK. And then all of a sudden, instead of that smooth letter ball, we have a lot more definition to our letter. And now you can easily scale it. Imagine if you modeled it and you had to scale it a little bit. And so that is using the new, what's called the PBR shaders in Revit. You can also, the PBR shaders are a little bit limited. So you can also do it with the normal shaders and just put a normal map in the bump slot. And so far it's always worked for me. So it seems like it just works. Although the new shaders, I have to admit, look a little bit better than the old one, but it's still fine. I don't think we have time to do the other examples here. These are just, this is a decal with a cutout, a transparent map, so that you can see the wall behind it. These are very helpful to have on the go, like if you do a lot of workplace, to have a bunch of stuff to put on whiteboards. Whiteboards are like things to put on TVs, makes all the difference. And then if you're looking for sources where you can get good material maps, I recommend all of these. So the top four are free, good quality stuff. These three are really great, but they're paid per credit, although none of them are expensive. And then these two are where you buy them in bulk. So you can get like all the letters that you would ever need from Arrowway. They have a whole package for it. They have a whole package with all kinds of wood veneers. And then the last thing to finish off with, these are our artificial lights. So let's make it dark. Let's make it in the middle of the night, and you will see them come up. So you might notice you see light here, you see linear light here, plain light there, point light here, and I have a few IES spotlights here that have these like defined cones on them. There's no geometry. So, and we actually do this on purpose so that we have these lighting families that we can throw in a project that help us to add fake light where places are maybe a little bit darker than we want, without us having to figure out light families that are actually tagged in schedules. And it's this whole thing where you don't want to really touch it too much. And so the trick is how we did this in Revit is, and I take the roof off here, you will see our families. So these families are lighting families, but they only have model lines in them. So they're easy to find and place, but model lines are rendered in Enscape, so they don't show up. And we have a filter that can take them out of our drawings, or you can put them on a work set together with your assets. And we made every parameter that we could instance. So like this plane is instance scalable. So it makes it really easy to play around with lighting. All right, we're right on the hour mark. So that is all I have for you.
Thank you very much, Peter. That was amazing. I've been following the comments during your presentation, and people are loving your tips. There is one question that came up quite a few times here, and maybe you could speak to it. You're using a preview version, so maybe a lot of people were wondering why they weren't seeing the same interface as you.
Right. So I'm actually not allowed to share the preview link. But if you have an Enscape subscription, if you go to your downloads section at the bottom of it, there is a section where you can download experimental builds or preview builds, is what they're called. And so you can download the latest preview is, I believe, 2.4, 2.5. And so then you'll see all this stuff that I've been showing you. But there's no official release date that I'm aware of, or it's not been announced yet. But I expect the new official version to come out in a few weeks. So like early November, I think it was targeted. Last time something was shared. So these things should be coming stable and official really soon.
Perfect. Thank you very much. So if anybody else has any questions, feel free to use the question box and we'll try to read through these as quickly as we can. The one question that keeps coming up is whether or not this webinar is being recorded. Yes, it is. There will be a link being sent out by email to everybody tomorrow, about 24 hours after the end of the webinar. So be on the lookout for that. There's a question
Jeff,
here. Sorry, go ahead, Gemma.
I was going to really quickly point out that I know this workaround with the hiding the edges and max is kind of annoying. So that is why some colleagues and we have set up a Revit ID for everyone so that you can vote on the Revit IDs platform to vote this up so that this becomes a priority for Revit. And so once this becomes an option or possible in Revit, then hopefully Enscape is going to take use of it and make sure that these triangulation edges are hidden.
Excellent. There was a quick question here about your hidden lights that you had just shown. Maybe you could explain that a little bit more.
So can you still see the screen?
Sorry, what was that?
Can you still see the screen?
Let's see here. Yes, we can.
Okay, so this all started out with the point light, which is the one that we use the most. And so I'll just show you that one. Inside the family, this is the regular light source or light family, because that is the only family in Revit that will allow you to put a light source in it. So it needs to be on light. You create a new family of light fixtures and you turn light source on. That's that yellow thing that you see here, which by default is hidden. And then we just drew like this 3D model, a lot of circles in 3D, and that helps you position. And that's really all there is to it. When we could, for example, with the linear light and with the rectangular light, we remapped some parameters that are by default type parameters to instance. And so there's a little trick for that if people are not aware. Let's say if you try to do it here, these are 2 out of the box parameters. So these come in Revit, you can create them yourself. If you create a lighting family, this is what you'll get. You see, you can change it type to instance. It's frozen. But maybe this was a happy accident. Maybe this was on purpose. They forgot to lock it here. So here you can change it. Sorry, it's this one. Here you can change it. So that's a way to work around some of these parameters that are typed and you can't seem to change them. You just put up 2 reference lines, put the parameter in between it, change it, and delete this thing again. And it works. I've never had any issues with it.
Okay. There was an earlier question too I thought was interesting. You were talking about grass and that was on a horizontal surface, but people wanted to know how you do that on a vertical surface. They seem to be having some problems, I think. Right,
you don't. Right now, so it always goes Z up. So if you try to do it on a vertical surface, you won't really see much. Like you'll see like on the edges a few grass, but it's been fairly often requested on the Enscape forum, so I imagine that at some point we'll probably get an option to do that.
Okay, great. There's a question here about creating stainless steel. Any tips for that?
You need to have a good map in the glossiness. So traditionally, you would you would just have a color on instead of a map on the diffuse slot or the albedo slot, and then you would put a stretched noise map or something like that on the glossiness slot and potentially on the bump slot. These are great materials, by the way, where you just go out to like a Polygon or a texture, SketchUp Texture Club or any of these other sources. So there's no need to reinvent the wheel here. Like every one of these sources is going to have a stainless steel. You just download the maps and just make sure you put them in the right slots and should be good to go. Also, Enscape has a somewhere on their website a Revit sample file with a bunch of materials in it. I'm pretty sure stainless steel is going to be in the sample file.
Seems to be a lot of questions on materials here. There's one about creating frosted glass now.
Right.
As well as metal, brushed metal, satin, specular.
Yeah. There's too much there to cover in the time that we have left. But I would definitely recommend downloading a sample file because I think it's it really puts you in a good position to start. You already have something that is very close to what you want, and then you just tweak it a little bit. That's often way more efficient than trying to reinvent the wheel. Frosted glass, I will say, like in the Enscape editor, the asset editor, which has the native Enscape material editor, there's actually a checkbox for frosted glass. So there it's really easy. In Revit, what we've been doing is putting a very dense noise map in the bump slot or in the glossiness slot or both. And that produces good effects. But it is pretty heavy. You want to have a decent graphics card for that.
There's a bit of a follow-up here about incorporating shadows onto frosted glass. Do you have any comments on that?
Yeah, right now shadows on cast and transparent materials, and frosted glass would technically be a transparent material. No, I don't. I think that's going to be a limitation of real. Well, I'll let the engineer speak of this. But what I understood is that was a limitation of real-time rendering for the time being.
Okay. Questions are still sort of coming in here. So here, Enscape trees can be replaced by 2D lines for the viewport only with the same method that he showed for the bed.
Yeah, this works on anything. Like you could put a stick and a cylinder or a sphere. That's another way to replace them. I personally like the aesthetics of this because it looks a little bit more true to the actual shape. Like if it's a tall tree or it's more round one, but to each his own.
Okay, I think we're just going to do a couple more questions here as we're coming up to the end here. Is there a way to only have plants show in a color, for example, green in a white mode setting?
No, I wish there was. Yeah, I wish there was like this. Like V-Ray had this list of materials to overwrite, like it had, or to exclude from overwrite. That is really because then you could like choose what you want to white out, and then still have some like accent materials that you can play with. Right now, white mode is like a total blanket white mode, except for anything that's transparent and water, I believe.
Okay, so I think this is going to be our last question. And for anybody whose question we didn't get to, we do have a record of it, so we'll be sure to get back to you after the webinar. So just bear with us while we do that. So last question is there any site that you recommend for? Oh, question walked away here. It was basically the question was about materials. If there was a site you recommended for really good tips and tricks for Enscape materials and setting those up from everything from beginner to advanced.
Yeah, so the Enscape blog has the best articles that I found. They're very encyclopedical. Like they will, like if they cover grass, they're gonna cover grass in detail, which I really like. So all the little ins and outs that you might find yourself running into at some point in a project. And Dan Simon might be on this call. He has written some of the best there. So if you just go to the Enscape blog or the knowledge hub, you'll find them all there.
Excellent. Well, I want to thank you again, Peter. This was a really, really good webinar. The feedback has been phenomenal. You have a lot of fans that are now asking for many more videos to be created. So whether or not you have time to do that, I don't know. But if somebody wanted to reach out to you, you had mentioned your handle a few times. Where can they reach out to you or tag you?
Yeah, so the best way would be to go to the Enscape forum, and then there's a subcategory for Revit. If you have a Revit specific question, there's also a main category that's not Revit specific. And in any thread, you can just write at P-I-E-T-E-R. So that's Peter with an extra I in it at the beginning. And then that will tag me and we'll see that pop up.
Excellent. Well, this is going to wrap up our webinar for today. As a reminder to everybody, this was recorded and there will be a link sent out tomorrow with a link to this recording as well as the files that Peter presented in the webinar today. So thank you again, Peter, and have a good day, everybody.
Here.